MSW Media.
The rule of law is not just some lawyer's turn of phrase. It is the very foundation of our democracy. The essence of the rule of law is that like cases are treated alike. That there not be one rule for Democrats and another for Republicans, one rule for the powerful, another for the powerless, one rule for the rich and another for the poor, or different rules depending upon one's race or ethnicity. To serve as Attorney General at this critical time is a calling I am honored and eager to answer.
So now it's clean up on aisle 45 time. And for a long while yet, it is going to be clean up on aisle 45.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 192 of Clean Up on Aisle 45. It's Wednesday, September 25th, 2024. I'm Allison Gill.
And I'm Pete Struck. We have a lot of news to cover today, including the latest FBI report on violent crime for 2023. And speaking of criminals, Mark Meadows has lost his bid to remove his Arizona state case to federal court.
Womp womp. They're going to need to get the license for the sad trombone song so that they can play it as often as they need to. Before we get into this week's agenda that I put together, I wanted to ask you really quickly because, you and I were a little bit delayed hopping on here because we were both watching that Deadline White House segment about the Michael Schmidt New York Times report about all of the, the weaponization of the Department of Justice, stuff we knew. But again, glad that it's being, kind of dug up again, kind of like the From Russia with Lev stuff. And, I did like an hour-long interview with him yesterday for the Daily Beans.
Oh, nice.
But just, top line thoughts, because, it's fascinating that they're pulling this out again.
Yeah, I'm glad they are, because I think a lot of people, as particularly Project 2025 hopefully continues to be in everybody's sort of front of mind and thinking about how awful it would be and how it absolutely is a blueprint for the Trump administration and written by people in and around his administration and him now. It's always like, oh, they could do this. And it's important to remember that, well, in a lot of cases, they did do that, right? It's not a hypothetical. We can look back and see. And what the New York Times did, a lot of it is not new information, but what they do is put together sort of the scope of everybody who Trump attacked, who then had DOJ or investigations turned on them, and whether that's, Director Comey or Andy McCabe or me or people like, John Bolton with the book that he wrote, or John Kerry getting investigated for violations of the Logan Act, to
Michael Cohen getting thrown in jail for his book.
Getting thrown in jail, exactly, and all these things, and kind of saying, look, funny how every single time Trump said that somebody was bad or committed treason or should be investigated, they actually ended up being investigated. And, what is new in there is apparently Don McGahn and possibly others at the White House counsel's office wrote a memo to Trump, which I'm sure he devoured with a very fine attention to detail, a legal memo essentially laying out all the things that he couldn't do when it comes to the Department of Justice and directing the investigations of people. And, one, there's no chance in hell he read it, right? He's not going to read that. Two, thanks to the Supreme Court, he can pretty much do whatever the hell he wants while he is in office. And then three, and Maya Wiley made this point on Deadline White House with Nicole Wallace, Don McGahn, he wrote this memo, but he also had chance after chance after chance to go to Congress and let them know the bad things that were going on, to go to the media if he wanted to do that and let them know what was going on, to go public in some other forum to let them know about the abuses that Trump was considering. And so now to kind of come out and say, well, we had this memo telling him that, to keep him on the path. It's like, well, okay, that's great. But the fact of the matter is he did, target all these folks. He did cause them to, have their lives upended and spend all kinds of money on lawyers. And so it's a little bit, I think, very self-serving on part of folks like Don McGahn. And, now Bill Barr goes out and, tries to talk about how he kept Trump from his worst impulses, when in reality, Barr was doing horrible things, particularly when it comes to, Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, but across the board, other things to squash, trample, ensure that no investigation of Trump ever, took off. There are a lot of people who, while claiming now they were the adults in the room, they enabled years of this. And had they behaved differently, maybe things would have been different in the end.
Right. And it makes me wonder, attorneys general have so much discretion. He whipped up a memo saying we're not going to prosecute obstruction of justice. The DOJ has determined that Donald Trump, even if he weren't the sitting president, is not guilty of obstruction of justice. And, with that get out of jail free card, nobody could charge him. When Garland got into office, he couldn't be charged. And then for, sitting here thinking, well, why didn't Garland go after Bill Barr? I think as of right now, we never imagined a Bill Barr doing that kind of shit. And there are no real laws in place to prevent it from happening, or to, Merrick Garland can't go after Bill Barr. It's the Department of Justice. He was the Attorney General. He had the discretion to do these things, and he will say that he had the discretion to do these things. And I don't think there's a provable case against that. But how do we stop it from happening? That's the question. We vote and make sure that we don't elect an asshole that'll put an asshole in the Attorney General's office. But is that it? Is that all we got? It's frustrating.
Yeah, and look, the IG recently, DOJ IG has come out with at least 2 reports where they're looking at some of the conduct of Bill Barr, particularly including like the Lafayette Square stuff. I think his actions surrounding Oliver Stone. They may have one other one. Marcy Wheeler's been tracking it. But at the end of the day, they're like, well, it was kind of shady and maybe inappropriate, but the power of the Attorney General is so broad that there was nothing here that he did that was, sanctionable, whether by, violation of policy or certainly violation of law. And they might have been a little bit more sternly worded than saying, this is against the norms and traditions of DOJ. But at the end of the day, the fact is, as an appointee, the Attorney General has an extraordinary amount of latitude. Yeah. I do wonder how much, if Horowitz is, who is, people who listen to the show know I'm not a big fan of, whether he's taking the easy political route, because I think there are some things that Barr was involved in that would be much harder to prove, that are a lot more sort of, dubious, whether it's the way he treated the intake of all the information from Rudy and others in Ukraine, talking about Hunter Biden in particular, but also, this whole just crushing of, not confirming or denying that Carol Linig's reporting in the Washington Post is true, but if in fact this allegation that $10 million came from the government of Egypt, and that investigators actually found through records that almost $10 million in U.S. cash was taken out of a front bank, a front for Egyptian intelligence in Egypt, at about the same time this alleged, payment to Trump was made, and Trump or Barr, quashed that or killed that. You know what? Maybe the IG ought to look into that, because that's a lot more significant than, saying something in private that was mean about Trump, that, he's a misogynist. God forbid fucking anybody say that in private. But, we can spend 18 months of taxpayer money looking into that.
Or trying to make it so that the Hawk Bank wouldn't be indicted.
Exactly.
Trying to keep that from happening.
When Barr, along with his special counsel, John Durham, are gallivanting all over Europe in the AG's jet.
Yeah.
And they hear from the Italians that there's apparently some sort of criminal referral that is financial in nature about Donald Trump.
So then he appoints Durham special counsel to investigate it, which is to kill it.
Right. And says, it's now a criminal investigation, to make everybody think, that all these guys in the FBI must have done something criminally wrong. No. It's a criminal investigation because the fucking Italians, I'm swearing it's not even the bonus episode, because the Italians gave you a criminal referral about Donald Trump that nobody knows about officially, because that was not in any part of the Durham report that was released. Merrick Garland on down seems to think it needs to be released, and some of that be okay if you're, an unfounded allegation, why tarnish somebody's reputation by smearing them with this allegation. But does any objective listener think that if the government of Italy gave John Durham and Bill Barr an allegation of financial malfeasance by Donald Trump, that there was a thorough investigation of that allegation, particularly given, I know Durham's team was tiny. I know Durham's team didn't have financial accountants. I know Durham was not set up to do financial investigations. I mean, we had a hard enough time on Mueller's team, and we had a bunch, and we didn't have enough. And I know Durham did not have that. So, is Mike Horowitz looking into that? Has anybody at the IG, has anybody at the DOJ asked to review, has shown the slightest bit of curiosity about what this Italian allegation was and whether or not it was provable or run to ground?
Yeah, I really think we should be a little more proactive in getting a different inspector general in there and getting to the bottom of everything that Bill Barr did. But you got to remember, we also have this Supreme Court. Remember a long time ago when we're like, you can't, it's never been litigated whether the president can give a pardon corruptly, like whether he's obstructing justice by giving those pardons. And everybody was like, well, let's test the theory. Let's litigate it. This Supreme Court would have used that case to grant immunity, right? Instead of using Jack Smith's case to grant immunity. If we had challenged any of the pardons as part of a obstruction of justice. So had those obstruction of justice cases been brought, then we still would have an immune Donald Trump. And think about it. If this Supreme Court says that what Jeffrey Clark did with the president isn't a crime and can't even be subject to judicial review, it's absolutely immune because it's a core thing. If Jeff Clark gets off the hook, there's no way you're going to be able to get anybody like Bill Barr, John Durham on the hook. That's just the way that I see it until we change this court and put in some better rules and laws. But we should probably get to the show.
I think that's fine. It's fine. So when we last were talking about the show, Mark Meadows had lost his bid to remove his Arizona state case to federal court.
Yes, and we're also going to discuss the latest resignation in New York City Mayor Eric Adams's orbit and a failed lawsuit by Russian asset John Solomon to recover the Crossfire Hurricane binder. But first, he did a writ of mandamus and replevin to try to get this thing. And he was more sad trombone. But first, it's Hall of Fame Day on Cleanup on Aisle 45, so we should shout out our Hall of Fame patrons, including Don't Memory Hold the Sacrifices Americans Made for Each Other During the Pandemic as Once-in-a-Generation Display of True Patriotism, Lisa Rollison, Star Lanus, Je suis fatigue. Please don't read this on the pod. We don't need a call out. Thanks for what you do. Ren, Special K, Kaidu, Kimberly D. Stephen, Nathan Dorn. Hi, Nathan Dorn. David Chandler, January 20 Baby, Maria Tovar, D. Gill, A Dinosaur in Dental School, and Laura Saba. Everyone, thank you so much for being Hall of Fame patrons. And if you want to support independent media and become a patron too and receive ad-free early episodes and VIP pre-sale tickets and meet and greets and stuff and all the bonuses, you can do that by visiting patreon.com/aisle45pod, AISLE45POD. And let's start over in Arizona. Let's start with good old Mark Meadows. This is from the Washington Post. A judge has denied a request from Mark Meadows, who was Donald Trump's White House chief of staff, to move his Arizona election subversion-related prosecution against him from state court to federal court. The ruling on Monday by U.S. District Court Judge John T. Tucci in the District of Arizona is a further setback for Meadows, who unsuccessfully tried the same legal maneuver a year ago over in Atlanta, right? In Georgia, Fulton County. Meadows has pled not guilty to 9 felonies related to his role in trying to subvert Joe Biden's win in 2020 in Arizona. Now, he's one of 18 defendants indicted in April by a state grand jury, which determined the defendants engaged in crimes including conspiracy, forgery, and fraud when they tried to deliver the state's 11 electoral votes to Trump instead of Biden. So.
Yeah, in Monday's ruling, the Arizona court found that Meadows had failed to, quote, demonstrate that the conduct charged in the state's prosecution relates to his former color of office as chief of staff to the president. The court continues, although the court credits Mr. Meadows' theory that the chief of staff is responsible for acting as the president's gatekeeper, that conclusion does not create a causal nexus between Mr. Meadows' official authority and the charged conduct, the court concluded. Meadows' lawyers did not immediately respond to requests for comment on Monday. Now, in both Georgia and Arizona cases, Meadows had hoped to move the federal court. Had hoped, rather, a move to the federal court could lead to a quick dismissal of the case against him on the basis that as a federal officer, he was immune from prosecution for acts taken in the course of his normal work. So this is from Meadows' attorneys, quote, Mr. Meadows has the right to remove this matter because he has a federal defense of supremacy clause immunity to the state charge, and Congress has provided that federal courts are the appropriate forum to adjudicate such issues, his attorney said in a July 26 motion. The conduct giving rise to the charges in the indictment all occurred during his tenure and as part of his service as White House Chief of Staff.
Interesting. In the Georgia case, Washington Post continues here. Meadows asked the Supreme Court now. He's up to the Supreme Court to overturn a lower court ruling, that's the 11th Circuit, that rejected claims that his alleged conduct was tied to his official federal duties. Now, the Arizona court found Meadows had, quote, not so much removed the state's indictment as rewritten it, seeking to reframe his role as one of, quote, merely facilitating communication to and from the president, or, quote, staying abreast of campaign goings-on. I think that's just admitting that you violated the Hatch Act, but okay. Quote, few, if any, of the state's factual allegations even resemble the secretarial duties that Mr. Meadows maintains are the subject of the indictment. That's what the court concluded. Rather, it added, the state has indicted Meadows for allegedly orchestrating and participating in an illegal electioneering scheme. Similarly, contrary to Mr. Meadows' reframing of the indictment, he is not being prosecuted for receiving text messages intended to simply keep him appraised of what was happening with the Trump campaign. That's what the court concluded. Like, I'm sorry, are you saying it was your federal job to run a campaign? Like, I'm sorry. And Judge Pryor down in the 11th Circuit, Chief Judge down there, was like, yeah, no, buddy.
Same.
No. So, I mean, we'll see what ends up happening. I think that this will be upheld, but I unfortunately have no faith that the Supreme Court will follow any kind of logical law here.
Yeah, and the sad fact of the matter is that the 11th Circuit and the state of Georgia and the state of Arizona, their courts, their highest courts, can all come to the correct conclusion that, no, this is not part of your official job. But like you, I have absolutely no faith that, you know, the majority of the Supreme Court, and certainly not Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito, will see or believe or feel that, well, you know, conceivably this is part of his official duties. And yes, in fact, it should be removed and remanded, all of these back down. And that is the sad state of affairs. And part of the reason that the public crisis and confidence and faith in the Supreme Court is that, you know, the worst in recent memory in our lifetimes, for sure.
Yeah. And they specifically, in the immunity brief, did not rule on whether it's the executive's job, whether it's Meadows or Trump, to take care that the state laws administering elections faithfully is part of a core official duty. They actually said, and this cracks me up, Pete, they said, well, we haven't been briefed on it, so we can't make that call. Yet they created this whole set of immunity and they weren't briefed on that either. So I don't understand. I don't understand a single thing they do anymore, other than it's just the opposite of Earth One. It's the opposite of what's supposed to happen. It's not justice. But anyway, that's just my 2 cents. We do have a lot more news to get to, but we have to take a quick break. So everybody stick around. We'll be right back.
Hey, welcome back. We have more of our Hall of Fame patrons to thank, including Karen Sherman, Tiffany Trump Was Adopted, Greg Kreimer, Roberta Reed, Fran Reichenbach, I Have a Crush on Pete and His Swears, Patty B., Berta 5078, Dr. David, Catherine Gilbert White is totally awesome at her job, Christine Tackner, Kirkland J. Bateman, Deborah Kirby, and AG promises her next tour will be Baltimore. So thank all of you for your extraordinary support. Thank you for being such huge patrons of the program and allowing us to bring this to you every week. And with that, let's go from Arizona out to New York. This with some reporting from Gloria Pazmino at CNN. federal authorities executed a search warrant at the residences of NYPD Interim Commissioner Thomas Donlan just over a week after he took on the position, he said in a statement Saturday night. Quote, on Friday, September 20th, federal authorities executed search warrants at my residences, Donlan said in a statement. They took materials that came into my possession approximately 20 years ago and are unrelated to my work with the New York City Police Department.
20
Donlan,
years ago.
20 years ago. So you figure 2004 is about 20 years ago.
Are they
Donlan,
gold bars with serial numbers?
No, I think it's classified. There's some indication, right? So Donlan, a former FBI official, added in his statement that the search warrant is not an NYPD matter, and the NYPD will not be commenting on it. Law enforcement officials say the search warrant is related to documents that the commissioner may have retained from his previous positions. The search warrant is not believed to be related to any of the corruption investigations currently ensnaring City Hall.
Oh my God, is that 5 now? What prompted the search so many years after Donlan's departure from government positions is not clear. A spokesman for the FBI in New York would not comment on the search warrant or whether the documents they were looking for were believed to be classified. Donlan was appointed as interim police commissioner just over a week ago after the previous commissioner, Edward Caban, resigned amid an investigation by federal authorities. It marked the first high-profile departure from Mayor Eric Adams' administration since the start of 4 separate federal investigations into Adams' office and the NYPD. So this is number 5, and it seems to be completely separate, and you're right, classified probably from when he was at the FBI. Caban, who had served as a commissioner for 13 months, said in a statement, "The news around recent developments has created a distraction for our department, and I'm unwilling to let my attention be on anything other than our important work or the safety of the men and women of the NYPD," unquote.
Yeah. Caban's departure came days after it was reported that investigators with the U.S. Attorney's Office for New York's Southern District had seized his electronic devices and phones. The investigation involves Caban's brother and enforcement around nightclubs in New York City, a source familiar with the investigation told CNN. Several other members of the mayor's staff are being investigated by the U.S. attorneys in both the Eastern and Southern districts in New York. Quote, "I was as surprised as you to learn of these inquiries, and I take them extremely seriously," unquote, Adams said at a news conference earlier this month. Fabian Levy, spokesperson for Adams, issued a statement Sunday in response to the search warrant. Quote, "As we have repeatedly said, we expect all team members to fully comply with any law enforcement inquiry," unquote, Levy said.
So, Pete, what do you think, before I continue with this story and a little bit of background on Donlan, talking about Caban and his brother and something about enforcement at nightclubs, what do you think that means?
It's a mess, and NYPD cannot catch a break, and there's so much criminality around Eric Adams. It again, one, is a matter of time before I think he is facing indictment, but two, these things, especially reminds me of some of the FDNY, the fire department in New York. There are charges we talked about, I think, last episode, where they were essentially, getting kickbacks from quote unquote expediters to sign off on inspections or get inspections, bumped to the top of the line. But at the end of the day, inspections of nightclubs, if you're going in to see, okay, do you have appropriate liquor licenses? Are you serving people who are underage? If it's an adult nightclub, do you have proof that all of the dancers are, over 18 and they're not engaging in sex trafficking, and you've got whatever legal procedures are required to be in place? If you're bending the rules there, you're one, encouraging crime potentially, and some of the worst and most heinous types of crime. So this is in no way a victimless crime. I mean, these, the sorts of things that are alleged do have real world impacts and real world harm on, whether it's consumers, whether it's people working in and around these various industries. And I think, in my mind, it's somebody going in and you walk in to take a look or do some sort of inspection, or you're stopping by and turning a blind eye to, serving whatever it is.
What? That's exactly where my mind went when I read nightclub enforcement, was that they're getting paid, just like you said, like the fire department guys, to do favors. And in this case, it's that's what popped into my head. They're turning a blind eye to something illegal going on in these clubs. But again, that's just all speculation. But this guy, Donlin now, the other guy who resigned, he's a former FBI official. Like you said, Adams appointed him as interim NYPD commissioner on September 12th. After addressing Caban's resignation. Quote, a short time ago, I accepted the resignation of NYPD Commissioner Edward Caban. That's what Adams said at a news conference last week, adding it was the best decision at this time. Adams said, I respect his decision and I wish him well. And then announced he was going to appoint Donlin. Quote, to ensure crime keeps going down in our city today. with the exception of the crimes he's committed. I'm taking immediate action in appointing Tom Donlin as interim police commissioner. He went on to say, he's an experienced law enforcement professional. He's worked at the local, state, federal, and international levels. Donlin is a former intelligence official who served as New York's director of Office of Homeland Security. He ran the FBI's National Threat Center and the FBI and NYPD Joint Terrorist Task Force. Quote, I'm honored and humbled to be named the interim commissioner of the New York City Police Department, the greatest law enforcement agency in the world, he said in a statement at the time. It's kind of a little backstab to the FBI. Okay. My goals are clear. Continue the historic progress, decreasing crime. I'm sorry. I can't read this with a straight face. And removing illegal guns from our communities, uphold the highest standards of integrity and transparency, and support our dedicated officers who put their lives on the line every day to keep us safe. That's what he said in a statement.
Yeah. So first, I don't know Donlin. We are certainly served at the same time. I read his archived resume from a company he ran sort of in between the FBI and service with New York. And it's one of those, again, nothing wrong with it, but anytime you have a resume that makes it sound like you've done everything everywhere all at once, it's like, all right, well, one, it's very hard to do that much. Two, if you're in an office the size of New York, unless you're like the ADIC or somebody, the assistant director in charge of somebody very senior, it's hard to run all of these different programs because there are literally, over 1,000 people in that field office. So again, do I fault anybody for sort of pumping up their resume for business development purposes? No. But that was interesting. And what I'm, of course, curious about is it does appear from the reporting to relate somehow to documents that he said he got about 20 years ago and not 23, which would have been 9/11, so something on or around 2004. And that two, somebody had to tip that off somehow, right? So somebody went to the authorities with enough detail that they went to a judge and demonstrated probable cause to believe that there was, evidence of crime.
Right. So this isn't just I accidentally had some classified and I forgot about it or anything because.
Right. And so why, and ordinarily there is the kind of thing that, maybe you go and say, I've done this before many times. I mean, sometimes if, the person's upstanding, they'll self-report, oh, shoot, I found this. I had no idea. I accidentally must have had it on the bottom of a stack of papers I brought home and I forgot that, there's classified on the bottom. Or I've gone out and asked people to return classified. And there are times I've had a warrant and I've gone out to ask people for classified back. And if they gave it to me, fine. If they said, no, I don't know what you're talking about, or I'm not going to give it to you, then I would produce a search warrant and say, well, okay, that's fine. Then here's a search warrant for your whatever, house, office, car, whatever the case may be. I need you to stand over here and we're going to, bring in the search team. So the fact that doesn't sound, again, we don't know whether or not there's any back and forth before this, but, anytime you get somebody that is that high ranking, and you're searching multiple locations for documents, the only unless they're like bearer bonds that were, evidence of a, used in some crime activity, the logical explanation is it's classified information. And who in September of 2024 was tipping off FBI or DOJ that Donlin had this, what I'm assuming to be classified information is an interesting story. Is it a spouse, an ex-spouse, somebody, a housekeeper? There's more to the story and, maybe we'll see, but not a great several weeks, months for NYPD or New York government in general.
No, agreed. All right, everybody, we have to take another quick break, but we have more news. So stick around. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. We have more Hall of Famers to thank, including Suzanne Ashworth, Mr. Halfspeed, Triple G, Jeffrey Kincher. Boy, would I love to be the bus driver. Mr. Stu Pedasso, Jason Berzoska, Meg Alexander, Janine Iorga or Lorga. I think it's Yorga, maybe. Chris McCulloch, David in Brooklyn, Christine Passion. Let's see. Veterinary for America 2024, The Tyrant We Deserve. And Clover's Tree 73. So thank you, everybody. Again, if you sign up at any level, you get to pick your name and we'll give you a shout out. But every month we like to shout out our Hall of Fame patrons. So thank you so much. And speaking of the FBI, Pete, the Washington Post reports annual data released by the FBI Monday confirms a clear decline in both violent crime and property crime last year. Homicides and reported rapes accounting for the biggest drops. The data shows that car theft was one of the few crimes with a notable increase from 2022 to 2023, up about 20%. Car theft. The FBI's 2023 Crime in the Nation report is based on submissions of reported crime from 16,334 law enforcement agencies, representing the vast majority of the American population. All large police departments that cover regions with more than 1 million residents, including New York, Los Angeles, etc., contributed to the report. The report was released as former President and 2024 Republican nominee Donald Trump has questioned the veracity of crime statistics while campaigning, blaming the Biden administration and Democrats for what he falsely portrays as crime-ridden cities like we've never seen before. So that's a very fancy way of saying he's been lying his face off about crime.
Absolutely is. And this is so frustrating because, one, the data clearly shows that this is the safest we've been in years, and certainly including the Trump administration in those years. And it dovetails with the thing that every single time a poll comes out where people are asked, well, who do you trust more for the economy and inflation and crime? And everyone's like, Donald Trump, Donald Trump. And it's like, why? Where the data points to the exact opposite. We are setting new records in the Dow. Crime data is down across the board. DJT closed at $12.15 today, an all-time low. There is no data anywhere to support this apparently prevalent view that Donald Trump is so great on crime and the economy and inflation. It's all crap.
Yeah, and here's some of the statistics from the report, Pete. According to the report, violent crime dropped 3% between 2022 and 2023, with murder and non-negligent homicide down 11.6%. Reported rape offenses dropped 9.4%. Property crime decreased 2.4%. The drop in murders in 2023 was the largest year-over-year decline reported by the FBI in 20 years. In 2022, there were 6.5 murders for every 100,000 people. In 2023, it was down to 5.7 for every 100,000. Crime soared under Donald Trump, and many of the drops being reported reflect a recovery from the 2020 and 2021 spikes, crime spikes. The 2019 murder rate, 5.2 per 100,000, slightly lower than last year. The rate of aggravated assault, 264.1 per 100,000 people, is still also higher than the 247.9 per 100,000 in 2019. So crime was way up under Donald Trump, and now it's way down. So not only do we have all this data supporting one thing, we have all this data supporting that it's the opposite. The opposite is true.
Right. And I'm sure we'll see a lot of coverage. We'll see coverage on the major papers. We'll see coverage in the major, online news outlets. We'll see coverage all over, news, Twitter, talking about, I'm kidding. When news like this comes out that would rebut the narrative, mysteriously, somehow, it doesn't seem to get highlighted. And again, that's one of those like, wow, I wonder why people have these incorrect perceptions about Trump. It's because this data, I don't know what it is, whether it's boring, whether it's too hard to convey, it just isn't conveyed. And so I sure hope that, one of the things that, Joe Biden can do is trumpet the success that they're having on everything. They're doing it with dropping the insulin prices, but go out there and lean into crime is down. America's safer. America's safer now than it was under Donald Trump, period. Full stop.
Yep.
Domestically, you are safer now than you were under President Trump. Mm-hmm. Across the United States. No question about it.
Yep.
And, we'll see if that translates. But talking about crime from NPR, Federal prosecutors say the man being held in an apparent assassination attempt on former President Trump wrote a letter detailing his plans. In addition, the government says Ryan Ruth traveled to Florida a month before his arrest and began casing the golf course and drove by Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. In court papers filed on Monday, agents included a letter Ruth allegedly wrote and left with an unidentified person in a box along with other possessions. The letter, addressed to the world, says, quote, "This was an assassination attempt on Donald Trump, but I failed you. I tried my best and gave it all the gumption I could muster." Now, according to the filing, the person received the box several months earlier, but didn't open it until after seeing news reports of the apparent assassination attempt on September 15th. The person read the letter and turned it over to authorities. Prosecutors say the box also contained ammunition, a metal pipe, miscellaneous building materials, tools, 4 phones, and various other letters. Now, it's important to note that the reason that this letter appeared is that prosecutors are seeking to have Ruth held without bond or without being bailed out and released. So you need to provide information like this to support that request. And the irony, of course, is that Don Jr. and others are, of course, whining and crying that somehow the feds, the deep state, is putting all this information about this letter out into the public domain. Where if you look at what they were whining about yesterday and the week before that, it was about the feds not being transparent enough about the investigations into the assassination attempt. So it is a nonstop state of complaint and whining and complaining. And, it is concerning. You read this letter and you're like, man, this guy's clearly not, is having some mental health challenges and needs help and needs to be detained. And thank God, he was stopped before anything awful and violent happened. But the response from MAGA world is exactly as you'd expect. It is complaint. It is fundraising. It is, further grifting. I'm sure there'll be some Trump dodging, doing something on a golf course in camouflage against, some enemy in the bushes. But, you can buy a coin with that stamped on it or something. But unbelievable. I'm just beyond frustrated.
Now, I know that, you said, and the story said, this was used to remand pending trial. Do you think that would this be evidence against an additional charge, a superseding indictment that for an attempted assassination? Because, it was months before the alleged attempt or the appearance of the attempt or whatever their co-parent attempt, whatever they're calling it at DOJ. It was months before when he wrote that letter saying, "I failed you." What was he talking about? Did he try some other time, or did he know he was going to fail? And if you use evidence and put it out in the public to remand someone, in jail, can you still use that against him in a case in chief for a superseding indictment? I don't know. What do you think?
Sure. Sure. Presuming there's nothing stopping, information or evidence you put forward towards it in a bail hearing, you can certainly use as evidence in your case in chief. The question is that, the crimes that he is charged with, the federal crimes or additional crimes that he hasn't been charged with yet that he might be. It depends. This is certainly speaks to his state of mind. If they can validate that it came from him, and, I'm sure the person he gave it to has been interviewed about, where did you get it? Who'd you get it from? They can do, take it to the lab and test it for latent prints or DNA. Was there anything like, an eyelash or something that can show that Ruth had that paper and wrote it, and taking handwriting exemplars because it's a handwritten note, and it can compare it to his known handwriting and establish that yes, this is he who wrote it. But it does a number of things, right? It talks about what his intent was. It speaks to premeditation, the fact that he was considering doing this, and so it's a very, as a prosecutor, it's a potentially very, very helpful piece of evidence that lays out. He knew what he was doing and he planned to do it. And it wasn't just I went out and got drunk and made a bad decision. It's like, no, for months and months and months, I was thinking about and planning to do this, and even wrote a note in case I failed that, somebody had to. So it's, yes, definitely helpful. I think, again, barring any weirdness behind the scenes, this is something that they should be able to introduce as evidence and eventual trial. I suspect, given his, his sort of confession and apology in this note, I wouldn't be surprised if he takes a plea. Why, unless he wants to soapbox a trial to, rail against whatever he wants to talk about. I don't see him. You never know, right? But I would not anticipate that he's going to try and strongly deny that he did any of this. It seems pretty clear that, what he was trying to do and what he set out to do is exactly what everybody was concerned about.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on this story as it unfolds. I think maybe more interesting than this letter, and this apparent assassination attempt is the fact that nobody believed it. Nobody believed Donald Trump or his campaign when it came out. I think that's pretty newsworthy as well. Everybody, we have, let's see, I think one more story, and it's a fascinating one, but we have to take this last break. So stick around. We'll be right back.
Hey, welcome back. Our last round of Hall of Fame donors includes breaking news. Gill struck for president 2032 at Dirt Road Dems, Mitchell, ATX Polar Bear, Maris Lawson, Sharon Tukalski, Anonymous Buddy, Steve Talley, Scott Griggs, Charles Jones, Al Marinen. Devil went down to Georgia. He was looking for an election to steal. He was in a bind. He was way behind by 11,780 votes. Thank all of you so much for your support. And for those listening, you too can sign up to become a patron at patreon.com/aisle45pod. Again, that's patreon.com/aisle45pod. All right. Our final story is about Crossfire Hurricane, my favorite stories, and John Solomon's bid to obtain the classified binder of documents about the probe. Now, a journalist's bid to obtain documents relating to an FBI investigation into former President Donald Trump's alleged Russia ties was rejected by a federal judge who cited, quote unquote, numerous problems with his case. John Solomon had alleged the Biden administration wrongfully withheld Crossfire Hurricane documents that Trump declassified in the final days of his presidential term. Solomon, who Trump designated as one of his representatives for access to documents under the Presidential Records Act, claimed the Justice Department and National Archives had an obligation to provide him with the records. I can't. The way John Solomon has pursued this, there's so many, a couple of facts, and, we'll read here from the ruling in a little bit. But one, John Solomon has repeatedly talked about trying to get these documents in a way that makes me think he either has them right now or he had access to them and took a bunch of photos or notes, and he's now concerned that he's got some legal exposure because he's sitting on top of classified information that he shouldn't have. That's my speculation. The other thing is that if you recall, and if you're a regular listener of the show, we've talked about in the past, I think it was last year, maybe early this year, folks in the Director of National Intelligence went to the Hill and briefed them that the government is still missing a binder of classified information that they've never been able to recover. Wasn't recovered from Mar-a-Lago, haven't been able to find it anywhere in the archives. Missing, not there. We know it was there and it's not there anymore. Whether that is this binder or a different binder, don't know. But at least the reporting back at the time that Congress was being briefed, I think it was that it was a 9 inches, not like a little binder of, 20 pages, a 9-inch binder of classified material that was missing. And now John Solomon, of course, trying to get access to this material.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story surrounding this binder. It has been for a while. But here, I've sent you the ruling as well, so we can read along together. But it opens up saying plaintiff John Solomon, as former President Donald Trump's representative, has brought mandamus and replevin claims to obtain a quote-unquote binder of records under the Presidential Records Act. Before the court are plaintiff's motion for summary judgment on his mandamus claim and the defendant's cross motion for summary judgment on both plaintiff's mandamus and replevin claims. There are numerous problems with John Solomon's case, the judge writes. First, the court lacks subject matter jurisdiction over the plaintiff's mandamus claim. Second, the records at issue are not presidential records under the Presidential Records Act because they are agency records under the Freedom of Information Act. How many times do we have to explain this to you people? These are not yours. Third, Plaintiff does not show any evidence in support of his replevin claim that can save him from summary judgment. For these reasons, as explained in greater detail below, I dismiss the plaintiff's mandamus claim for lack of subject matter jurisdiction. I deny as moot plaintiff's partial motion for summary judgment. Accordingly, I deny in part the defendant's summary judgment motion as moot as to the mandamus claim, and grant in part the defendant's motion for summary judgment on plaintiff's replevin claim. So that's the order here. So no jurisdiction, moot, deny in part, grant in part. But yeah, I think it's fascinating that yet again, here we are explaining to somebody on Trump's team that these are not yours. These do not belong to you. These are agency documents under FOIA. They are not presidential records under the PRA. The 11th Circuit has told you this. How many times do we have to talk about this? And it's going to come up again. Yes. Because that's one of the terrible things that Judge Cannon did, was tried to get them to write some weird jury instruction about what if the Presidential Records Act is not, it doesn't say what it says and says this instead. How would you write a jury instruction on Earth 2? And that's in a couple of the amicus briefs to get her removed from the case once the 11th Circuit overturns her dismissal of the documents case. So it's going to come up again and again and again, but it's fascinating to me.
Yeah, and I'm sure she got the idea at one of the many conferences that it has come to light she apparently attended and didn't disclose in her financial reporting forms. Because why, if you're going to be a controversial judge on a high-profile case, would you not assume that everybody's going to be digging through every last bit of your life and find that you are going off and, getting these perks and attending these things, and that maybe you should be pretty thorough as you are in your nitpicking in your, conduct of the trial of the Mar-a-Lago documents, that maybe you should have the same rigor when it comes to your personal finances and activity. But setting that aside, because that's more of a Jack topic than a cleanup topic. First thing, one, I cannot read replevin without somehow my mind seeing it as McLovin from Superbad when he goes out and has to pick a name for his fake ID, and it's like, what are you thinking? So
just McLovin,
there's that.
Yeah.
And then two, the person who was spanking John Solomon about this was none other than Judge Richard Leon, who, for, again, listeners may recall that, he's a George W. Bush appointee in D.C. He is, fair to say, a conservative jurist. And when you look at, some of his actions and rulings with regard to the January 6th cases in particular, if you're going to be somebody like John Solomon, you would want very much to get Judge Leon to have your case. But even Judge Leon seeing through John Solomon's bullshit and, smacking him down. But you're right. We are going to keep hearing about this. If things go well and Kamala Harris is elected to be the next president of the United States, we will have years and years and years of continuing nonsense, I think eventually culminating in somebody other than Eileen Cannon having this case done in Florida, but it'll take us years to get there.
Yes, it will. And I want to thank you, Pete, for the fact that we didn't actually have to go over those posts on the porn site from Mark Robinson. Because, boy, we did some dramatic readings here at home, my friend and I, Joelle. But I'm glad that the only thing that's kind of being put out there are the, I'm a black Nazi and I think slavery is great. I would have a couple of slaves myself, that kind of stuff, and not the actual porn stuff where he graphically describes encounters with his wife's sister. So I just want to thank you for not, on behalf of the listeners of this program, that we didn't go into those at all. Even on the bonus, we didn't.
Yeah, and I can't see doing it because they're truly disgusting. And nevertheless, even though his entire staff appears to have left him, he is still claiming to be the victim of a high-tech lynching, just like Clarence Thomas. I'm sure Clarence Thomas is happy to have it. Like, why is my name coming out of your mouth? But he's still, that is, by the way,
he didn't drop out by the deadline.
We were talking about, and it's not just that he's running. He is right now the lieutenant governor of the state of North Carolina, right now, sitting in that office.
Yep.
Yes, he's a candidate, but it's not like, oh, he's trying, he's aspiring to be the governor. No, right now he is the lieutenant governor.
Yeah.
But hey, easy come, easy go. I guess it's fine.
Yeah. Where are the calls for him to step down? I am blown away, but also, again, never surprised that these Republicans will never denounce anyone. Now, I mean, Mitch McConnell did walked right up to the line when he said that the problem with the Republican Party is the quality of the lack of quality candidates, right? And that's putting it mildly, to say the least. But that's really the only kind of denouncement. Lindsey Graham was even like, "Oh, I don't believe it." JD Vance
said, "I don't not believe him.
I don't
disbelieve him," or whatever he said. And it's like, JD, come on, man, come on.
All right. Well, you did not fuck that couch either. Sorry, I won't ever stop laughing about that. And it was great when my friend Ben Folds, musician, played up at the Wiltern. He and I had been having conversations back and forth about sometimes writing musicals at some point. And he said, he brought up the fact that he did a really good impersonation of Rage Against the Machine. And he's like, yeah, well, you remember from Rockin' the Suburbs. And then somehow it came up in the conversation, some of those that work forces are the same that fuck couches. And I was like, dude, you have to do that. You have to do that on stage. And he did when I went and saw him at the Wiltern. He did. He gave me a shout. It was fantastic. Shout out on Twitter. And I will never stop making couch jokes. So thank you for that little bit of a tangent there at the end of the show.
I did, and this is from since we are going into Robinson, this is from a Politico article. Leaked database files from other website breaches show that Robinson's email address was registered on the dating websites Adult Friend Finder and Mate One, and the now defunct website Lords of Porno.
Thank you for doing that in the movie trailer voice.
There is no evidence that Robinson was recently active on any of these websites. The leaked data from Adult Friend Finder listed his last visit is December 31, 2013. Lords of Porno.
We should make a show. We should.
Hey, what'll get us high in the Google search rankings? Yeah. I know. We need a catchy name.
What should we call our business? Fraud Guaranteed? No. Lords of Porno. Okay. Oh my gosh. Anyway, thank you everybody for listening. Thanks to our Hall of Fame patrons. If you want to become a patron, again, that's patreon.com/aisle45pod, AISLE45POD. Everybody, please, if you don't listen to the Daily Beans, I recommend you listen to yesterday's show. It's almost an hour-long interview with Lev Parnas after his documentary From Russia with Lev, produced by MSNBC, Corbin and Meadows. It's a fantastic documentary. I finished watching it with 1,000 questions, and I asked about 7 of them in that hour-long video, and I probably will have him back on the program again. So if you're not a Daily Beans listener, at least give that one a whirl. It's a fascinating interview, a lot of bombshells that he alleges in that interview. So any final thoughts today, Pete?
No, I'm going to go listen because I got to believe you're probably like the most preeminently qualified person to interview him. And he's probably sitting there saying, holy cow, this woman. I've never been asked these questions because we never get past the initial, explain what Russia misinformation, what disinformation, what does that mean? So I'm take a listen.
I'm like, how did Hunter Biden get to Kazakhstan and have his laptop stolen? Who was it? Because, and then tell me how involved Firtash was with all of this. What happened in Vienna? Like, he's like, how do you know this? I'm like, this is what I did for years, who's followed this shit. So it's a really fascinating interview. So thanks for the kind words, Pete. And everybody, we'll see you next week. Unless you're a patron, we'll have a bonus episode for you in a few days. I've been Allison Gill.
And I'm Pete Struck.
Cleanup on Aisle 45 is written, researched, and produced by Allison Gill, with editing by Molly Hockey. Our art and logo design are by Joelle Reeder and Moxie Design Studios, and our music is composed and performed by Adam Orr. Cleanup on Aisle 45 is a proud member of the MSW Media Network, a collection of creator-owned podcasts dedicated to news, politics, and justice. For more information, visit mswmedia.com. MSW Media.